Hello everyone, and welcome back to Blue Mondays, the GLORIO Blog's Eureka 7 and Evil Women recap podcast. I am joined, as always, on this episode by my lovely friend Aqua. How are you doing, Aqua?
I'm all right. I'm dozing. I was just wondering if we need like a Eureka 7 themed opening line for this podcast.
I could probably think one up, but it would also probably be a waste of time considering this is the 6th episode and we've already gone without. So let's just wing it.
It's kind of a bummer there's not like a cool surfer greeting that the members of Gecko State use.
I mean, I think one of the things this show is missing is a cool on the next episode of phrase. You know, something like right. You will see the tears of time. But alas,
expect fan service.
Indeed, yes. I'm also joined by G. Hello, G.
As the foremost expert on evil women, I'm happy to be here to lend my expertise.
Yes, no, it's incredibly important that we had you for this episode because the evil woman dial is off the charts in these episodes.
The quotients are so high, these two episodes.
Now. I do need to add an important bit of nuance, which is it truly an evil woman if the woman is evil against her will? You see, evil womanness is only acceptable when it is safe, sane, and consensual, right?
No. I mean, we will get into this, but I think the key factor here is that although the aforementioned evil woman may be under some external influence, she's evil either way. That's the thing. Completely.
Besides, honestly, it's a bonus that the way she becomes evil is in itself highly problematic. I mean, that's just
when they
that's
shoot
just cherry
me
on
up
top.
When they shoot me up with the evil woman juice.
Oh boy. So. You can tell we cannot hold back this tide of evil woman discourse any longer. So, this episode, we are covering episode 11, Into the Nature, and episode 12, Acperience 1. These are pretty damn important episodes, which also mark a pretty considerable shift in the style of the show, let's say.
Yeah.
I want to talk to G first. G, obviously, you know, as those of us who have seen this show before know, these are fairly pivotal episodes in terms of building out the world and the story. Did they kind of match up to your memory of them, or were they different in some ways?
I would say for like these set of episodes, I think broadly, a lot of it does match up to what I remember. I think maybe some of the things that have changed are the things that like have changed out about me as I've grown up. Like,
yes,
I'll get more into that with the second of these two episodes because that has the
weird shit.
Yeah.
Right, you know, what's that trope, like the Lotus Eater machine, you know, the classic, like, we're going to throw the characters into, like, a mental prison. You know, there are aspects of that I now, I have some thoughts about, but
yes.
In terms of, like, these episodes as I remember them, this is kind of, like, in my brain, right, like, to be clear, the episodes I was not on, I still liked those episodes, but like in my brain, season 1 of Eureka 7 is like a bunch of cool shit happens in the first 3 episodes. They haze Renton for like 6 episodes, and then a bunch of more cool shit happens again.
I think I'm kind of with you on that one. You know, would you say perhaps that the real Eureka 7 starts here?
I might agree with that. You know, there. I think in my mind, this is where like Eureka 7 sort of like not just here, obviously the previous 2 episodes as well. Yeah. This is kind of where Eureka 7 begins to reveal its hand of not only the overarching conflict, but also what is going to be the sort of core through line of a lot of these characters. Like for the rest of this show, almost, right? Like the dynamic between Eureka and Renton, right? The kind of getting into the mythos of Eureka 7 with the Corallian, right? Like this is the beginning of a lot of the like big picture stuff, so to speak.
I think I remember these episodes being a lot more impenetrable than they actually were, and I think that, as you say, is a reflection of having seen them much younger and being much less aware of the storytelling tropes that they use, are leaning on from the past, and also just the general philosophical bent of some of the stuff that's happening there. So it was fun and interesting to revisit them, I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
Before we start, I just wanted to point out we didn't talk about her because Anemone only appears very briefly at the end of the previous episode, but these two episodes introduce her in force, so we should talk a little bit about Anemone's voice actor. Aqua, do you know who her voice actor is?
It's Ami Koshimizu, is that her name?
That's correct,
Yukiko
yes.
from Persona 4, yes.
Yes, Ami Koshimizu.
So-
This was a fairly early performance for her. She was only 19 when this was recorded, but she had already led a couple of productions, Ashita no Naja, and more memorably School Rumble, where she was Tenma. In the years since, she's voice acting royalty. You know, she has been involved in some extremely high profile productions. She is incredibly prolific. Just a couple of examples of roles that she has had. She was Karen Stepfeld in Code Geass. She's Hollow in Spice and Wolf. She was Kato in Star Driver, reuniting her with the Bones staff. She was Charlotte Yeager in Strike Witches. She was Rosa in Umineko. She was Cure Melody in Sweet Precure. She was, as you say, Yukiko in Persona 4. Probably her signature role at this point, she was Ryuko in Kill la Kill. She was Sailor Jupiter in Sailor Moon Crystal. She was Mikumo in Macross Delta. She was Miki in Devilman Crybaby. And she is our second Birdie Wing alumnus because she was Amane in Birdie Wing as well.
Yes.
In case you don't
Really?
remember, that was Aui's caddy / professional weather forecaster.
Yes.
Right. A really interesting career when you like read it out like that, because I think so for me as an Ami Koshimizu fan, I tend to think of her more kind of aggressive roles, right? Like Ryuko, Kallen, right? But like the fact that she has also played characters like Yukiko, like Ahoro, and Anemone, right? A character with a lot of range.
Yeah, she's mostly associated with like, or at least in my head, she's like, oh, like she does the ladylike characters, you know, the dainty, the traditional Yamato Nadeshiko kind of stereotype. But then she's also Ryuko, who is one of the like most aggressive, shoutiest anime characters in recent history.
And I mean, she's done so many other roles that I didn't mention. That's just a selection that I've picked out. She has incredible range, is the point. You know, she's extremely prolific. And yeah, this was, you know, this was definitely not her breakout role. I would say that was School Rumble. She was Tenma in School Rumble, the female lead. But this was certainly an early highlight of her career, you know, an early milestone, which was a stepping stone to her ascending to the A-list.
I mean,
you know, and
I think as we will find out, it's like she definitely was already active before this, but if you kind of look at her like lineup up leading up to Eureka 7, I think it's kind of obvious that Anemone is probably the most like probably ambitious, demanding role she plays up to this point.
Yeah,
like,
it's certainly the most dramatic role, and I think it's
Yeah.
actually a good showcase of her range because, as we'll see, Anemone, a character which sort of ping-pongs all over the spectrum between ladylike and aggressive. But let's begin with episode 11, Into the Nature. Before we start talking about the episode, let's talk a little bit about the titles. Aqua, do you know anything about the title track of this episode?
It's grammatically incorrect.
Correct, yes. And that's because it comes from a song by Germans. And nobody understands German grammar, least of all the Germans. No, actually, this is an occasion where both of these episodes are taken from track names by the same band. They are both tracks by the German acid house band Hard Floor.
Yeah, that sounds like a German band name.
Yes, they are very well regarded, long running. They still exist today. German. I mean, do you even call electro groups bands? I'm going to use it for the sake of
I think it sort of depends on what their instrumental lineup is, right? There are some bands and there are some groups, I guess. That make
let's call them a duo because
yeah.
they're two DJs by the name of Oliver Bonzio and Ramon Zenkar. Hard Floor, like I said, in terms of the bands we will see represented in the titles of this show, are actually a pretty big deal. They did have a few minor charting hits, including Acperience 1, mostly in Germany, in the UK, in various European countries. But like I said, a very well-known and well-renowned name in the scene there. So
I do say it is quite noticeable for a like Euro dancey act to break into the British mainstream. Like that doesn't happen very often.
I wouldn't necessarily say the mainstream. I mean, we're talking the lower end of the top 100 here. But remember that the UK had a very distinctive like club and dance scene in the 90s, which is when these songs were hitting. So
it's just that like the Euro dance scene is so infamously like weird and insular and laden with one-hit wonders and weird side projects. That is right, and it's quite noticeable, right?
I wouldn't really describe these guys as Eurodance. They're kind of like harder into like techno. Like I said, acid house is their.
It's more like actual club stuff.
Yeah, this is like the serious shit, you know. But yeah, you know that they did have some minor. I mean, for bands like this, for groups like this to chart at all is kind of an achievement, and that definitely the very big techno and electro scene in the UK in the mid-90s was a big part of that there. But they are, you know, a favourite of some of the creatives behind this, which is why they pop up several more times as we go through the show there. But let's begin episode 11, Into the Nature, and we begin with an evacuation order.
It's a pretty short scene. They just say that, they need to evacuate a city, right, because of an approaching natural disaster that we soon find out is called a Corallian.
Yes, and the reason why I wanted to very briefly talk about this scene is that it's the first time we really get a name and a face to put to the governmental forces that we've seen. They refer to themselves as the Federation Air Force, which, you know, it isn't much. It's a very generic name, but it's the first time that we have any sort of name for sort of the authority figures in this world. Also, the kid they show here looks stoned out of his mind.
You got that, 1,000-yard stare.
Yes, definitely.
He's just trying to drown his sorrows of living in a fascist hellscape, I guess.
Well, no, it's not fascism; it's a federation. But yes, after that, straight into Anemone. Let's talk a little bit about Anemone here.
Wrong again. It's not even straight into Anemone. It's straight into the goat, Gulliver.
Yeah, it's true. Actually, yes, we do. We begin with true legend of the genre. Look, Gulliver's great. Everyone loves Gulliver.
Yeah, what is he exactly? Nobody knows. But...
He's very heavy, and he likes jam.
He's whatever Mitty from Made in Abyss is. Just a blob with eyes.
Yes, Gulliver's fantastic. He'll keep popping up there.
But then, yes, we do get Anemone eating some jam in the most upsetting way possible.
Yeah, it's a
nice little callback to her, the way she was introduced in the last episode.
Right. I mean, it's very obviously meant to be blood symbolism, right? But it's also, the impression I get is that she's trying to be sexy, but just kind of getting it wrong because she's completely insane and has no idea what actual sexy looks like, and as a result just seems even more unhinged than normal.
That's sort of also the kind of thing I'm going for, yeah.
I almost saw that as almost more of a, like... I mean, it is definitely sort of kind of playing up the, like, sexy, dangerous angle, but I almost saw that more as because obviously the thing is, like, Anemone sure looks a lot like Eureka. Gee, I wonder why, right? And there's a little bit of that, like, almost a, like, dark mirror to Rey feeling of, like... To me, I saw this eating scene as more like, oh, this is a person who just fundamentally does not, like, know how to behave like a human.
Yes, absolutely. I think, I mean, that kind of ties into the thing I was suggesting, which is she's trying to do sexy eating, but she's bad at it because she doesn't know how human beings actually act, right? Yeah. And so it's clearly the act of somebody who doesn't know how people act and doesn't give a shit about how she looks. Basically, she seems, and also a very immediate contrast to Eureka, who is very reserved and polite,
Right.
and restrained, and Anemone is very clearly none of those things.
I think it is very much trying to do the same thing that Evangelion did with Rei and Asuka. Like you have the like soft-spoken, demure, passive one, and you have the like active, fiery, hot-blooded one, but taken in different, interesting directions that makes it more than just a rip-off, right? I think there's definitely a psychosexual aspect to Anemone, especially when you keep in mind some of the stuff we see in the next episode.
Yes.
Oh, definitely.
Like she is definitely supposed to represent the more like aggressive sexuality in the metaphor that this show is, right? Is the metaphor for growing up and puberty and that kind of stuff.
We could definitely get into like, the way she pilots her mech later.
Yeah, we will definitely talk a bit about that. But I think the point is, the idea is that they're immediately trying to set her up as a contrast, right?
Yes.
Like, even looks-wise, like, although obviously she has Eureka's same weird eyes, in this opening scene, they draw her, she's very pointy, she's full of pointy chin, pointy eyes. She looks kind of snakish and smug. She looks messy and dangerous. And immediately there's the contrast with Eureka, who we first see drawing blood as she strokes the Nirvash's hide. And so there's kind of like that immediate symbolic connection between the two of them.
But there is a strong cinematography in the early scenes with Anemone, where indeed she's always filmed from a certain angle that makes her look snake-like or hawk-like, like a certain animal that you sort of associate with unpredictable aggression, right? That could snap in an instant.
Yeah.
And they use the visual language of angle very well. Like she's always shot from like below or above. It's sort of, it's quite literally the edge of the visuals represents the edge of the character.
Yes.
Right?
And there's an important plot-related reason as well, because by shooting her extensively from low angles, we get to see that she has an unusual attachment under the line of her chin. She has some sort of cybernetic augmentation, which we will get a little bit more of later.
She has a charging board.
Yes.
Yes.
But it's a very, you immediately get the impression of somebody who is a little unhinged, a little dangerous, somebody who clearly feels like she is in control, even though she is being told Dominic is telling her to go somewhere and do something. The way she replies to him is very casual, very unconcerned. It seems like that she feels she is in charge here.
It's interesting because she's both putting on the act of like the little princess. She has a cute pet that she likes to hug. She wears cheery clothes. When she interacts with the pilots on the ship, she's being very like, she's putting on this innocent act, but it's all over the place. It seems like all of her behavior is mannered in a certain sense. Like she is just imitating everything she does, from the coyness, the cheeriness, but later on also the evil femme fatale act. All of it seems disingenuous or programmed or learned in a certain way. Like it didn't develop naturally.
Yeah, I to kind of go off that, and I guess we'll probably have to get into the rest of this episode eventually. So the last thing I'll say about Anemone for now, anyways, because there's a lot I want to say about Anemone, but I kind of want to get later into like more of what she is doing and then kind of speak to those. Yeah. So for now, I'll just say that I think the thing that's like so interesting and multifaceted about Anemone is she is. I think to kind of continue with the like, she is an echo of the Rei Asuka dynamic, is that like one of the things that was like most notable about Asuka's character, right, is the like she is a child, right? She's around Shinji's age, right? And there's that constant feeling, especially whenever we get into like her dynamic with Kaiji, right? That like, or Kaji, that like she is a character who is attempting to put on like
Mhm.
the mannerisms of somebody much older, much more
Oh yeah, that's
sexually
not even
mature,
subtext.
and
That's text.
right,
Right.
and then the ways in which that fails, because fundamentally she is still a child and she's treated like a child, and like the ways in which that like warps her sense of like what love and like respect mean. And I think you kind of like see a little bit of that here in Anemone, taken to its kind of most like villainous logical conclusion of like that
Yeah.
style of character, where like
Very
she
much
does
so.
kind of veer rapidly between like, yes, the coy princess and also I made twisted psychopath.
Mhm. I think the thing is that both girls, Eureka and Anemone,
Say that 5 times fast.
yeah, are like supposed to be like dark reflections of like growing up wrong, right? Eureka is emotionally stunted because she was never had an ordinary childhood, and then Anemone is the complete opposite, is just completely deranged to the point where you cannot see who the real her is, because everything is a mask.
And also, I think that this opening scene, as I was saying earlier, quite nicely sums up the opposing philosophies they've been brought up under. Eureka is very restrained. She keeps herself to herself. She doesn't show much emotion. Anemone's kind of a sense freak. Like like playing with the strawberry jam it's a decadent, lascivious thing to do, and it establishes her personality wise as somebody who is very all out, somebody who is very how to put it, like indulgent. And I think that's like a really strong first piece of characterization to get on her.
You also see her go through pretty much every emotion on the human spectrum in this entire episode. Like, so.
Yes.
Oh yeah. I mean,
that's something we'll definitely get to in a moment there. But let's flash back to the gecko for now. We have Eureka in obviously a very intentional echo of what we've just seen with Anemone, touching the Nirvash and it giving her paper cuts, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, well, it kind of further echoes the thing that happened in the previous episode, right? Where like Eureka feels like she's losing her connection to the Nirvash, right? As Renton becomes a more prominent member of Gecko State, and here it's almost a little like it's like a little overly dramatic, but it's like, oh, the Nirvash is even hurting her now, and but I think in her mind she truly believes. I think it's whatever we believe. I think in her mind she believes that like, and they kind of get into this right where like everybody on the Gecko State is talking about like Eureka's like kind of spiraling mental state, right? It feels like it's represented in she feels like she's being rejected by the machine that like she in her mind feels like justifies her existence, right?
Absolutely. And I think it's good characterization and sells the sort of emphasis on the team that they all realize this. Like, nobody's stupid here. They realize that she is not in a great place mentally. We have this conversation between Misha and Talho about it. Talho noticeably is not worried about Eureka per se. She's worried about Eureka because Holland is worried about Eureka. She herself seems a little bit more ambivalent to the whole thing, would you say? That was my impression, at least.
I think it's always kind of, I think they've made it pretty clear, right? I think speaking to like, I forget if I was on that podcast, but when you guys talked about like the kind of weird, I don't think it's explicit. I don't think it's actually like real or explicit, but there is like the like shape of a weird polycule, right? Between these four characters.
It's kind of a love triangle that's not explicitly romantic, but based on jealousy.
Yeah, and so like they kind of establish Talho is like, if not hostile to Eureka, then at least like does not.
She's giving her the side eye.
Yeah.
But I do get the feeling that Talho does care about Eureka. I mean, from that scene, I was more like getting the impression that she is worried about Eureka. She is just not sure whether Holland is dealing with it in the right way.
Yeah, I think that's a completely valid take on the situation. You know, it's.
I mean, given the fact that she's also snippy at Holland, right, regarding the
That
way
is true, yeah.
he treats Eureka in this episode, or what he allows her or doesn't allow her to do. So I think Talho does care about Eureka, maybe only in the fact that that she cares about Holland and he cares about Eureka. But I think that her motives are not strictly selfish here.
Yeah, it's with Talho, it's sometimes hard to say what is just generalized aggression and what is aggression at a specific grievance. The point is that everybody's kind of on edge about this, or everybody involved in this process is on edge. You know, we have
everybody except Mathieu, I guess.
Yes, we do have this.
Well,
nice
he's got to talk about his dream, you know.
Yeah,
and his honey and his sweetheart.
This nice scene of the crew eating, which I think is nice. It's nice to see the crew do normal stuff. We get some more flirting ? Between Gidget and Moondoggy. Moondoggy has no idea how above his weight he is punching, man. Like,
oh yeah, I mean, like, well, okay. Let's be clear. That is the case for both of these couples, right?
Yeah.
Like Hilda and Matthew, and Gidget and Moondoggy. Like both of these men have like
zero self-awareness
into women so out of their weight class.
But I mean, is it punching above your weight when she is also infatuated with you? That is just being lucky. That is like
you're right. I mean, you are right.
Let's say Gidget seems a little bit spacey herself as well.
Yes.
She's not the brightest bulb in the box herself, but I think it's nice here that Renton is clearly worried about Eureka. Right, while everybody else is goofing, he's kind of concerned about what's up with her. There's some good facial and body animation here, more good stuff with kind of Renton's weirdly elastic motions. We do learn something important here as well, which is Eureka doesn't dream. She's never had a dream. She doesn't do dreams.
Oh, how enviable.
I know, kind of. I was like, man, must be nice, honestly.
Yes, well, that's when news arrives that a Corallian has been discovered.
Yes.
And
the illustrious Corallian of killing those dudes in that one episode fame.
Well, we don't actually know that the Corallian killed those dudes. It might just
it was there and they died.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But yes, you were saying, Jay.
We are once again doing the thing of, like, because Renton is our viewpoint character and Renton doesn't know what a Corallian is, we have to stretch out like him and be like, hey, what's a Corallian? And nobody telling him. Right?
I don't
know about Corallians.
So like, this is what viewpoint characters are for, obviously. But I do think that kind of like the 2 seconds we get of every crew member trying to explain it is actually a really good bit of here's every character's kind of character tick in 2 seconds. So Mathieu takes the opportunity to brag. Talho is rude and dismissive. Gidget is trying to be helpful but is totally clueless. Moondoggy is utterly incoherent. Hap is straightforward but doesn't actually answer the question. Stoner is poetic but doesn't answer the question. And Holland just doesn't give a shit.
Yeah.
I think
I do also like how that sequence ends with Eureka. Like,
yes,
it's a nice little bit of editing.
Yeah, and I think this episode especially, it's noticeable that Eureka's personality has shifted somewhat notably, and it's been happening gradually across the last couple of episodes. But definitely this episode, she's way more cagey. She's more withdrawn. She's suspicious. She doubtful.
She seems to have regressed a little bit to what people said she was like before Renton joined the crew.
Absolutely, yes, and I think they do a fairly good job of making that known to the audience without specifically sitting down and pointing it out. Although there is obviously a lot of people in this episode saying that Eureka is not doing great, and in fact, she's not doing great enough that they don't want her. Or Holland initially, or does he? Holland initially doesn't want her to go on the mission to the Corallian, but she insists.
Like, knowing Holland, he might also just be using reverse psychology.
Right, that's why I paused, because he sure gives way super easily here. And also when Renton asks her why she's going, she just says, because Holland wants me to go.
Mm-hmm.
Now, didn't we just have an episode a few episodes back about how the only reason she does stuff is because Holland wants her to, and maybe that's not such a great idea sometimes.
Right, I mean, that was her justification for the massacre, right?
Exactly.
Holland told me to.
No, this is something I like really much, is when a character learns a lesson or makes a change in their personality, but the flaw doesn't disappear like snow under sunlight, right? It can still be there. The character can still sometimes fall in that same pitfall or fall for the same trap that they used to, even though they have ostensibly learned their lesson. That is good characterization.
Absolutely, and I think in a less complex show, Eureka's sort of come to Jesus moment a few episodes back would be mark a permanent change in her character for the better. But clearly, actually, she hasn't forgiven herself, right? She said at the end of that episode, I haven't changed.
Right.
And she kind of hasn't, right? In fact, she's kind of getting worse again, as we were just saying. She's a little bit distant. She's a little bit unengaged with what's happening there.
She has a certain context to grow as a person, which is when she's with the kids, but in anything other than her interactions with her and with them and maybe Renton, she does still seem like the same person that she, or could have been the same person that she was when she was blindly following orders, right? The because Holland wants me to is such an often repeated phrase at this point.
Right, and also it's
become a fundamental part of her character.
It's also an abdication of personal responsibility, right? It's not because I want to, or because I think it's important, or even because I don't want to be left out. It's just delegating your responsibility to somebody else at that point.
It's because she has no sense of self, right? That is Eureka's whole thing. Like that I think only being with the kids and being with Renton in a way has her feel as if she is her own person, right? That is why the kids are so important to her. She is their mama. They are dependent on her. She needs to set the example for them. They would be lost without her. So they give her individuality. They give her value as a person.
And I think it's very noticeable that we get less of the kids in these episodes, and what we do get are of them worried and paranoid and tearful about what's happening to her. You know, we see Mater and Link break down into tears while they are quote unquote eavesdropping on
That's
Holland
a nice little callback to earlier episodes where the girl is Link, right?
No, Mater.
Oh, Mater. But Mater will start crying, and then Link is like, oh, don't cry, I'll also start crying, and he also starts crying.
Maurice just looks so done with their shit. Like,
I mean, he also seems a bit older, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think Maurice is like in the 7 to 8 range, you know, but yes, we do cut away from the drama on the Gecko, though, to see Dominic has a spiffy new uniform that's very similar.
He's having a great time bossing people around.
Yep,
he's throwing being bossed around.
We get the captain again. Is Jurgens his name? I feel
Jurgens.
Yes, but he is now, again, long-suffering. He is now responsible for escorting Dominic and Anemone is making herself helpful with the crew.
Yes. As we spoke to before, right? This is kind of the bit where she is kind of being the kind of spoiled princess character, right? Like pushing button. You know, what does this button do? You know, handing off Gulliver to the captain.
Yes,
right. Is where we discover Gulliver is a black hole, basically.
He's incredibly heavy.
Yes, incredibly dense platypus dog.
And I think this scene is interesting because Anemone is still being a bad person, but she's being a
Oh, yeah.
bad person in a completely different way. She's
Mhm,
being kind of
mhm.
like, she's playing the ingenue, she's pretending to be like spoiled and a silly little girl and still causing trouble that way, and
Right.
generally is acting way more like flittish and childish than we've seen of her thus far.
I mean, I think that is the strength of part of her characterization, in that she can be both the like mischievous little imp who causes problems on purpose, tee-hee-hee, and also a genuine threat, and it can change at the drop of a hat, right?
Right, it's part of the unpredictability, you know, and
Mhm.
I think it does occasionally get a little bit towards the, you know, I'm the Joker, I'm so
Yeah.
crazy thing, but
It is still
they keep
anime, yeah.
they keep it mostly in check here, and I think they do a good job of distinguishing her two personalities, which we will get to again very shortly. But jumping back to the gecko for a bit, boy, the gecko has a huge bathroom.
Hey, if you want to take your Japanese style bath where you sit on a chair in a big line next to each other and pour water over your head, you need a big bathroom.
I'm just
It's
saying,
so goofy, right? Because I think what Zigg is getting at is like, if you've ever like had the opportunity to take a tour of like a real world like ship of any kind, like a military ship, especially like a battleship or an aircraft carrier, it's quite cramped in there, right?
Yeah.
Because
space is at a
space
premium.
is right. You know, like every square foot that you've reserved for your traditional Japanese style bath is one less square foot to fit fuel or ammunition, right? And so the Gecko State just having this huge
giant
bathroom.
Japanese style bath is very funny. I think it's weird Eureka doesn't take off her weird neck ring.
Yes,
even when
that
she's
is something
in the bath.
I also want. That's something that
yes.
also struck me as unusual. Like I always thought, like, is she wearing like a bomb collar or something? And the fact that she doesn't take it off when she's in the bath only has me more convinced that thing matters in some way.
I won't say anything, but yes, the fact that she doesn't take it off is odd. It is the first time we see her with her hair down, which happens occasionally.
Yes.
And I think this is kind of an important scene in a low-key way, because it reaffirms that even though she is doubtful and you know, out of sorts, the children are still very strongly attached to her. You know, if anything, they're even more attached now that she's in a tough spot. You know, so although it's a very short scene, I think that it's quite an important one there. We go from there to Holland laying out the plan, which is fairly straightforward and self-explanatory. But I do like that he correct. Oh, go on, Ju.
Oh, just though also still ambiguous, right? Like the thing
it's
that
not very clear what they want.
Right,
Yes.
like especially like for you, Aqua, watching this, like, do you have any idea what they are actually trying to achieve here? Like both Gecko State and the military?
No, I mean, I know what the military want to achieve because they actually say it out loud.
Yeah,
this
they
is like
do
a
actually
test run
say it.
for Anemone, right? I mean, it is kind of kind of a curveball because you think they're there to intercept Gecko State with the Corellian, but then it turns out that they're just
kind of.
Yeah, kind of. But it's mostly a test run for Anemone and the end.
Yes, we will talk about the end in a moment.
Yeah.
But
I mean, the feeling I'm getting from the Corellian is just that there must be something inside in the zone inside the Corellian and they need to get that, but Eureka and the Nirvash are the only ones that can really make it into the zone.
Yes, and the Corellian is, I think that the way they build up the Corellian sort of teeters on the edge of being frustrating, because the writing is so obviously going out of its way to avoid describing exactly what the Corellian is that it occasionally feels a little bit artificial, I think. But they do a pretty good job of making it seem like a big important thing at the same time, so it's hard to weigh the full effect of that. There is a little character bit here which I really like, which is that Holland correctly guesses that Mathieu is scared, even though he's putting on, he's like big man show.
Even though it wasn't obvious that he's scared.
I just think it's a good example that Holland knows his crew and knows their quirks, you know. But
and kind of as we get into it, once they actually approach the Corallian, the tension is somewhat justified, right?
Yeah.
Because
there's one thing I want to note before we get to the Corallian itself, which is when Renton and Eureka get in the Nirvash, the compact drive reacts to Renton, but not to Eureka. And that clearly disturbs her. And Renton is oblivious because he's an idiot. But clearly, you know, she is looking for affirmation from the machine, whether it is alive or not, which is still somewhat up in the air. But she doesn't get it. You know, instead, it appears to favour Renton, and that kind of becomes an issue in a bit. But yes,
now that we have a boy on the crew, we have a real pilot for this thing.
But yes, we are in it now. We get some cool footage here. We get to see the KLFs launched by just being dropped out the back of the bomber, which is neat.
I always do love that style of mech deployment.
Just drop them in. We get some cool footage of the LFOs launching, although they do recycle the Nirvash launch from the OP. Which,
right, they got the standard runway.
Perfectly normal trick there. And as we approach the Corallian, which for the purpose of clarity, in case anybody is listening without having watched the episode, appears to be like a huge superstorm. It's like a gigantic storm with like a sphere a dense sphere of cloud and mist in the middle, like a huge orb there. Right. And I think they do.
Which I did find
like,
surprising.
How so?
Because I mean, everything that they say about the Corallian, maybe it's just the word, but it sounds like a creature, like a Corallian, like a type of alien or something like that. That combined with the scene a couple of episodes ago where all of the Federation mechs were supposedly destroyed and slaughtered by a Corallian, make me think like, oh, this is like some alien creature or like a big beast that, you know, has entered the atmosphere, and that's why they're going after the Corallian.
We do say that people are killed by a tornado or by a hurricane.
That is fair, right? So, yes.
Though usually, strange coral fungus don't grow out of things struck by a tornado, which I think is probably more what Aqua's getting at, right? Is like the visual signifiers we were given up to this point communicate something much more biological in nature, and then you see the giant floating wind sphere. And I do think it's probably some of the intention, right? Is like it's supposed to be ambiguous, right? Like Eureka, like it's so clear, right, that they do not want you to know what a Corallian is yet.
Right, and that's what I meant when I said it occasionally feels like withholding that information feels a little artificial, because they kind of tie themselves in knots to not tell you what it is. But the thing I will say is that obviously at the end of these two episodes, we see some further evidence of perhaps it being something more than just a storm. But at the same time, you know, depicting the storm as an entity, as an animal, as a being is a very classic bit of descriptive poetry. You know,
I mean, the Corallian itself also has some like cosmic horror vibes, right? It is a natural phenomenon, but it is also supernatural. It seems to even have a will of its own. It's
definitely more. It's a force of nature in the apocalyptic way, you know, and we see this because there's repeated references throughout this as to the trapar density surrounding the Corallian is extremely high, and it becomes
the vibes are
very,
off.
very difficult to fly. You know, characters repeatedly talk about how difficult it is to ride through the trapar, how it becomes dense, it even becomes visible at some points here, and the KLF squadron is wiped out in seconds because they just cannot control themselves.
I actually really like this scene. I know I know the angle of this podcast is more about the narrative and thematic elements of Eureka 7,
please.
but I'm here, so I do want to give a shout out. I really actually like the scene where the KLFs try to approach the Corallian, because you can even see in the ways that they surf, they are not as good at it as Gecko State, right?
Absolutely.
Like they are stumbling, they are tripping, right? They can barely stay upright on these waves, right? And I think it's a very classic trope, of course, right? But it does a very good job of visually communicating, like, because up till now, I don't think we've ever. Let me think. I think up till this point in the show, it has never really been brought up that like surfing in the air is difficult in a KLF or an LFO or in any of these mechs, right? Like the actual act of movement has not been portrayed as difficult unto itself.
And
right?
that's partially because we've only seen like super aces so far.
Right.
I wanted to
the
say,
point
if
is that-
Renton can do it, it mustn't be that hard.
Well, I mean, that's kind of what I mean, right? Is if even Renton can like go and deface that like Federation base and like dodge gunfire and be like mostly okay. It's like, okay, like flying in and of itself is not that difficult. And so you have this scene where like, okay, I mean, look, they're mooks, but in theory, trained military pilots are like not even under attack. They are dying just trying to stay afloat. Like it really communicates the environmental danger of approaching the Corallian, right? Like that. This
the thing is, they are not surfer dudes, right? They just surf for their job. It's kind of like the same as like a cop who rides a motorcycle versus, you know, a professional stunt driver or something like that.
Yeah. I think that it's also it just adds so much weight to the nature of the Corallian as this kind of all-consuming force, right? They really. I want to say that I love the KLF being taken out by the surfboard spinning out.
Yeah,
it's so a little good. It's a little slapstick, but in the kind of way that's like, yeah, that probably would happen. Actually, it probably would happen there.
Those are the parts that really remind you of the surfing angle, right? Because like, you know, there are totally videos out there of people surfing, you know, actual real world surfing on waves, and like one person like bails and then their board keeps going and flies into another surfer. Like this is like shit that actually happens in real life. And so there's like that kind of delightful bit of, as you say, sort of almost physical slapstick to it.
I mean, the same thing also happens with the real military, right? You know, like, oh, we like put a mortar into our cannon, and oh no, it falls out and explodes. Like these kinds of slapsticky mistakes do happen.
In general, I think all the way through these two episodes, they do a really good job of selling the incredible like physical nature of the Corallian and what being in close proximity is doing to them. And there's some stuff that we'll get to in a bit which takes it even further. But let's talk about Anemone again for a second, because clearly it's now her job
woman juice.
It's her job to get out there and give them what for, and she doesn't really want to do that. She's not into the idea, or she's not into the idea at first.
I mean, if you see how she pilots the end, I can sort of imagine why she's not into it. Like, she's basically strapped into that thing as it like drains her instincts and basically acts on its own. Like,
there's some real weird like parasite BDSM vibes to the whole thing.
The end is the first. I mean, we could just say, right? The end is the first mech in this show that really makes you question what the fuck, like, an LFO is in Eureka 7.
It's also in this episode that we actually get confirmation that it's the robots that bleed and not the people in them.
Yes, because of
when Anemone cuts off the arm of Matthews.
Yes. Let's before we go too far into how cool the end is, and it's very cool. Let's get. But what to make of Anemone's unconventional method of persuasion, where Dominic takes out an injector filled with what looks like human blood, let's be honest, and just sticks her under the chin through that port and shoots her full of the bad person juice, and then she's a psychopath.
Yeah.
It's pretty disturbing.
I don't remember explicitly like if they say what is going on there, but like obviously the read here is that, you know, it's something that removes inhibition, right? It's an upper is I think how we describe it in the biz.
To put it mildly.
Right, and because it's like there's a little it's kind of, again, this is kind of what makes Anemone such an interesting character, because it's even her trepidation is a little bit hard to read, right? It's like, okay, she does not want to pilot the end, she does not want to approach the Corallian. Like, there's a little bit of like, is it bad vibes? Is she afraid of piloting the end itself? Is she afraid of for her, like, her own well-being? Like, what is...
Or is she just being a brat? And the answer is, I think it's a little bit of everything.
Right. And so there's this element of, like, I mean, as we say, she has the port, right? Like, that port has been installed there for a reason, right? Like, this is clearly not the first nor the last time that this has happened, right? And this kind of calls into question everything about kind of Anemone, right? Because, like, you know, we even go back to, like, when she meets Dewey for the first time, and she's, like, fawning over him, right? And like, just how indoctrinated is, like, Anemone at this point, right? Between both the behavioral indoctrination, but also the chemical indoctrination.
Yes. And this is what I was talking about earlier when I was saying that she's a crazy girl in two different ways, in that she's, you know, her quote-unquote normal self is very, you know, aggressive and bratty, but in the way a teenage girl would be aggressive and bratty. You know, she's spoilt, she throws tantrums, she's pouty, she causes trouble, but she's not evil. But when they put this juice in her, she's evil.
Would you say that Anemone becomes a different person when she pilots the Psycho Gundam?
No, that would be ridiculous. But
it is kind of that, though, right?
I mean, it's a more explicit version of that, because obviously, you know, but yes, I mean, like, all crazy, you know, tech magic, you know, designer baby girls are indebted to Formula Same at some level. But yes, you know, I mean, I think the thing which makes this stand out to me is just that it's very explicit, and I don't necessarily mean. But I don't necessarily mean it's violent or gross, but just that there is no pussyfooting around the idea that they are drugging her up to turn her into a psycho killer. That it is just there.
Also, just the fact that Dominic is doing it, because up until now he's mostly been like the guy who is also there. You sort of sympathize with him because he's like Dewey's lackey who has to run around and fix all of his business and go along with his unconventional methods. Yeah. And then
he's kind of been Anemone's whipping boy as well. To a certain extent.
And here it is just like, oh no, this guy is like all in on the creepy fascist experiment stuff. Like,
Dominic is one of those characters where, like, I mean, when you see him, he's a distinct enough design that you know he's going to be around for a bit. But, like, the thing that's kind of interesting about Dominic, even in these two episodes, right, is like there is an interesting dynamic there, because as we see in the following episode, where Dominic becomes, like, very worried for Anemone's safety, right, like, in a way that I think reads beyond just he's worried about a military asset or his job, right? Like Dominic's concern for Anemone feels very genuine in the following episode.
I think there is some of the it's because she is an important asset, but yes, it's a little bit more than that as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's talk about everything to do with the end.
Let's do.
So this is an extremely cool evil robot. It's very cool.
Yeah. It has arm blades that combine into a surfboard. All right.
Yes, and then
it can also a song about fucking your mom.
It also that surfboard can also separate, so it has like water skis instead. The first mech we have seen that does that. Anemone pilots it by hanging in some sort of weird organic womb that has eyes in it.
It has Wolverine claws.
Yes, it's very evil. It has organic eyes, seemingly.
This is like the classic mecha design 101. How to make a robot feel evil is give it human eyes.
Yes.
Like, it
about
always
human
works. It never fails.
I mean, the eyes are kind of a recurring motif, though, right? Because again, Anemone's weird BDSM cradle piloting thing also is covered in eyes, real organic eyes.
Yes.
And we have not seen, like, all the other mechs in this show have been piloted with levers and pedals and steering columns and stuff. And this thing apparently seems to be piloted by psychic control.
Right.
Again,
like I said,
that the KLF pilots also have like organic eyes in their helmets, right?
Right, to a certain, but they are still part of a technological device. You know, like Anemone,
I think those are meant to read as like an advanced display, whereas like the end is just like, I mean, that's just a flesh creature. You know?
Yeah, like this is the most Evangelion mech we have seen thus far, in that it is clearly not entirely a mech. It might be an animal of some sort.
Yes.
Oh, and also it's the Nirvash. It is a Nirvash.
Right, that is also the evil Nirvash, right? To complement the evil Eureka half, right?
Yes. We also have an evil Nirvash, to the extent that on the scanners they just show up both as the Nirvash. It has the same signature. But this thing is a real mindfuck, really, honestly. It is so different. Anemone pilots it in that insane piloting suit that looks kind of like a cross between a plug suit but also like organic body armor or something like that.
Looks like she's been infected with the Venom symbiote.
Yeah, it's not form-fitting. It's kind of bulked out. It looks like her head is sticking out of a huge orifice in it. It has a wicked black and orange color scheme. It's just a lot, quite frankly.
It's good. I mean, it's a very, like, if you're going to this is how you establish a villain, right? In mecha or in anime in general, right? This is all working in concert, right? It's working narratively and visually to communicate to you. Because, like, let's be real, right? Gecko State has been dunking on the military, like, this whole fucking show, right? Almost
they've basically been a non-factor.
Right, and so you introduce this as your, like, oh, no, this is what happens when we play for keeps, right? Black, spiky, Wolverine claw, grapple hook, bio-organic, psycho girl, super machine.
Yeah, it's just, what if we had all of our evil ideas at once?
I even love the way the way does Anemone pilot the end? I guess that's ambiguous, but the way like it fights, right, where it's like, it's almost like an ambush predator, right? The way it gets Matthew, it's almost like a shark, like coming up from beneath.
It moves way more like a person than anything we've seen thus far. It has a fluidity and sort of twitchiness to its movement, which sets it apart from a lot of the other robots we've seen. A couple of other notes as well. We have been told repeatedly that it is extremely difficult to fly in this trapar heavy environment, but Anemone is flying like nobody's business. She is like all over the shop. She is moving faster than anybody else. She cuts Machia's arm off, as we alluded to briefly, and the robot bleeds. She attacks the Nirvash by coming out of the sun, which is a real-life tactic that fighter pilots use. And Eureka only just manages to avoid her, and then it has rocket-powered, rocket-punch grappling hooks.
Hell yeah.
The beginning of a long trend of things that should not be able to roboteching all over the place, because these grappling hooks are very persistent, and they go wherever they seem to want to go. There, it's worth pointing out, this entire fight, there's an enormous animation bump for this. Huge.
This is where they were saving it for, and the episode ends very strongly, right? It really sends the message, right, where like Anemone basically grapples the Nirvash, like they're right up against each other. Up until this point, right, like we've seen the eyes, but so far the end has mostly had a blank expression like most mechs, and then once it closes in on Nirvash, right, it's like its lids close, like narrow and like its
real
pupils,
eyes roll into.
It's so good. And then
it's a very obvious visual tribute to that iconic shot from the beginning of Evangelion 02, where we see the Ava's eye roll into position there. But it's still a great effect.
And then
do you
we
remember what?
End with, what's up?
There's something important that happens before that. Do you remember what Anemone says?
Yes, I was actually going to get to that, right? Anemone calls Eureka my little lookalike, right?
Indeed.
Yes.
And she also says that, the Nirvash looks a lot like the End, right? So continuing to further emphasize that these two are mirrors of each other.
Right.
And then we get, the wildest, 15 seconds of, facial animation from Anemone, right? Just, she's really going for it.
We get Bascued Crisis, which is an incredible name for an attack. An attack which, incidentally, seems to have no point other than to just make you crazy. Like, it doesn't seem to do anything other than make you freak the fuck out, which is...
it's pretty good.
Eldritch Blast.
Yes, really something. I think it's really interesting that Anemone... Because, obviously, from the audience's perspective, so far we have been, hey, Anemone sure looks like Eureka. And Anemone is like, oh no, she looks like me. And that's an interesting inversion there. But yeah, it's a really terrifying ending to this episode, I think. You just end it with all the main cast screaming, basically. Anemone is screaming in triumph. Eureka and Renton are screaming in pain, confusion, whatever you want to call it.
I think it's very funny that narrator Renton is like, oh, and then I died.
Very.
One thing which I really like is that the little variations we get in To Be Continued. So, like, when Renton is chipper, it's a very chipper To Be Continued.
Mm-hmm.
When he's in trouble, it's kind of like a downbeat To Be Continued. I think that's a really, really cute touch there.
Yeah.
And then the next episode preview promises us a world of nightmares, which is quite a promise. So, we're moving into episode 12 here, Acperience 1. In my memory, this was one of the most important episodes of the show. After viewing it again, it's certainly very distinctive. I'm not sure how I feel about that declaration, though. Aquagate, what was your first impression after seeing this episode?
I mean, my first impression was, and apologize for beating a dead horse, but this was the most Evangelion-esque episode of Eureka 7 so far.
I mean, the comparison is unavoidable because this is very much a show that reminds you that an episode that reminds you this show was made in a post-Evangelion world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it has its own reason for existing, and it certainly doesn't feel superfluous. But stylistically, yes, we are taking a hard left turn from Gundam-esque mecha action towards Evangelion-esque personal / psychological drama here.
But I think overall it is a more accessible version of that. Just like how Eureka 7 in general is kind of a more, and this is not a criticism, it's kind of a more digestible version of Evangelion. Like how I talked about Anemone and Eureka being kind of like Asuka and Rei, but they are not as aggressively unappealing as Asuka and Rei actually are in the Evangelion anime proper.
I think Decades of Otaku would like to have a word with you about that.
That's why I specified in the anime proper.
Yes.
Right? Like, they are not as extremely freakish as those two characters are.
I like you say that because, like, on one hand, you're absolutely correct. On the other hand, like, Anemone's face when she shouts Bascude Crisis looks like she's about to, like, fucking, like, I don't know, bite your throat out. So,
and there's also the bit in this episode where she turns into a giant fish. So,
yes.
Oh yeah, it turns into a literal shark. Yeah.
This episode, I mean, this is kind of related to the thing I asked at the start, which is this episode is a lot less completely incomprehensible than I remember it.
Right. I can totally see someone being young and watching this and being like, what the hell is going on? And like watching this at my age, you kind of see what they're going for, the symbolism that they're using, and it's pretty damn obvious. That doesn't make it bad. But it's just an easy visual shorthand summarizing Renton's and Eureka's struggles and psychology, right?
The way I put it, or I was thinking to myself when watching this, is like, okay, I think as a kid, I definitely recall this episode as being like, hey, like, wow, whoa, it's like we're going inside the mind's eye and all that shit. And I think, like, now that I'm older, I look at it and go, yeah, it's like, yeah, he's like inside this like mental nightmare prison, but it's like a shitty boyhood nightmare mental prison. Like, oh no, a classroom and a bathroom.
I need to go to the toilet, but the bathroom is locked.
Right. It's like this,
It's
like,
one step away from I have to speak to the class, but I forgot to put my clothes on today.
Yeah, and in some ways that fits thematically right, because it's like, for all the like Evangelion like comparison you can make, it's like Renton does not actually have that much like legitimate mental baggage or trauma that he's carrying. Like, he has some, of course, but like at least at this point in the story, it's like, what is there that you could even like what primordial memories from 14-year-old Renton could you even evoke to like traumatize and break him mentally? Like, he hasn't lived enough.
If this dream is anything to go on, he's horny.
Wow, what a shock. Yeah, I think I think you're both right there, in the sense that I still think this episode is good, and I think some of the imagery is extremely striking, but it's much less impenetrable than I remember. Most of this imagery is fairly, if not obvious, then not the deepest thing in the universe. It's not
this naked girl turned into a giant fish that wants to eat me. What could this possibly mean?
Yeah. On the other side, I do think that the presentation is good. I mean, I think sort of trapped in a nightmare dream world is kind of an anime cliche at this point, but this is among the better examples I've seen. I think that for the most part the presentation is good. I think that there's some good character stuff we get through there, and there's even a fun B plot. We have a fun little outside the dream stuff just to sort of contrast the I think it's quite an effective deliberate contrast, actually, because the gecko segments are quite techy and heavily kind of, how to say it, technical, detail focused.
Well, it's a very I mean, even in this like very Evangelion inspired episode, the battle between the Gecko State and the military is very, very Gundam Real Robot coded, right? Because the scenario here is that whatever Anemone did with the Bascude crisis has sent all three of them, Renton, Anemone, and Eureka, into some sort of like mental other world, right? And so without any KLFs or LFOs, right? Because also Matthew's down for the count, and Hilda has to take Matthew back to Gecko State. So this is a battleship on battleship battle, right? No mechs. This is just two ships calculating trajectories and attack vectors and calculating for the gravitational pull of the Corallian and adjusting firing angles.
That's a bit I really enjoy, and it sort of ties into what we were talking about last episode, where they really make the Corallian feel like a force of nature, is the idea that the trapar has become so dense that it's actually starting to bend gravity and light, and so even their laser beams are bent. Now, Eureka 7 has a long and proud history of bending laser beams, and we'll see some more of them before the show goes out, but here it's almost believable. They make it seem like a thing that is actually happening for a reason.
I mean, it also gives the battle a like incredible vibe of like a classic naval battle, right? Like, you have to deal with the waters and the wind, and you want to like hit them with all you've got once you're like sailing past their flanks.
It's all the classic, reading, people reading off charts and shouting military jargon,
I do like the bit where Gidget is like, I guess this is like what happening, and the dude with the mustache is like, stop with the we need, hard and fast commands.
Kengo.
Right.
Yeah.
I do think it's...
I do like Gidget's response, though, because she's like, hey, look, normally I just handle communications, but right now I have to double, like, both comms and radar or whatever. It's like... She's like, I wasn't trained for this, okay?
Look, I'm just a PR girl.
I do think it's very funny
yeah.
that whenever you give any type of writer in any type of media the chance to stage a battle, they will eventually come down to what if the ships pulled alongside each other and fired broadsides?
Because it's badass, man.
Yeah. I mean, at one point I thought they were gonna the Last Jedi, the Federation, like, just run them through them at light speed.
Look, every battleship commander in the history of humankind has dreamed of what, and it never happened because the sad reality of naval warfare means this. It basically could never happen. But I guarantee you, every battleship commander in history has dreamed, man, would it be badass if we just pulled right up on them and blasted them point blank?
And then I could yell, fire all our missiles.
I believe the term is fire everything.
I thought you were going to say, I believe the term is take off every Zigg.
No, that's a completely different thing. That's if you're flying an aircraft carrier. But yes,
no, this is battleships, baby.
I think that this outside stuff does it gives some gristle to the episode when it might otherwise feel a little bit like it's floating away up its own ass to a certain extent.
I do think it's well balanced because I did think to myself, I think like why even Kid Me was able to like appreciate an episode like this is because the creators either intentionally or unintentionally understood, look, man, like we made this show for like teenagers and preteens. They're not going to want to watch 22 minutes of like a kid like going through the trials and tribulations of the mind. So like, I don't know, throw in a cool spaceship fight.
Yes, and so I think it's interesting, G, that you mentioned something a while back, is that you said that it's the Bascued crisis that triggers this sort of bizarre dream sequence. So I kind of wanted,
you know what? I guess
I kind of wanted to ask Aqua, what do you think actually happens here?
Because,
what is this sequence of events?
I think that it's the Corallian triggering this. Like,
so that's my impression as well.
You see the Bascued crisis, and it causes them mental pain, and then there's like a part where Renton sort of goes crazy and reaches,
and he shouts for assistance.
If we're talking about scary faces, the Renton face here is up there,
and he reaches for the plug, the
emitter drive.
The emitter drive, yes, and I guess that's maybe how he ends up, because then we go straight to the dream sequence. So I'm assuming that they somehow flew into the Corallian, because at the end of the episode you see them at the middle of the impact crater, which implies that they were in the middle of the Corallian. Right?
So that was always my read as well, is that Anemone blasted them with the Bascued crisis. Renton counters somehow by using the Nirvash, and in sort of the feedback loop, they all get swept inside the Corallian.
Right.
We do see the kind of weird Doctor Who time tunnel effect. We saw it briefly in the previous episode as well, but we see it again here, which says to me, we are traveling into the Corallian here. And it's kind of a hint that traveling inside the Corallian is more than just flying into this weather phenomenon, right? There's a metaphysical aspect to this journey as well. There's an interesting little bit of dialogue here, which Hilda mentions that last time the Nirvash was the only one to make it inside the Corallian, and this time is the same. So, that's not implying that the Nirvash is the only one that can make it, but it sure is weird that it's the only one that's made it both times.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, I think that I think the implication is very strongly that they fall into the Corallian here, and the Corallian is the thing which is causing all this weird, trippy imagery there. Speaking of trippy imagery, shall we try breaking down what exactly is going on in Renton's weird dream here? So the first image we see is he's back in the classroom, but all of his classmates are now clay figures, statues, rock formations. It's hard to tell, but they're all frozen in time, almost.
I think this is sort of like this is where he started. He was living a dull life in his dull hometown, surrounded by people he didn't really care about.
Yeah. And people who barely felt alive to him. Right. I think that is the obvious implication here, that the people around him were not really people. They were statues. They were artifacts.
NPCs, as we would say. But then, of course, they start talking about butterfly mating rituals, and then things start getting weird. He learns about the birds and the bees, and that almost literally expands his world, because he now sees himself as a giant looking into a model of the classroom where he is also sitting. So I'm assuming this refers to him like meeting and falling in love with Eureka, which broadens his horizons, right?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that it represents him being able to see that his classroom was just a very small world that he is now outside of and bigger than. I think it's a fantastic bit of visual poetry, even if you don't necessarily buy the underlying meaning. It's a very haunting visual, and I think that's very strong there. Something that we do get in one of our flashbacks to the Nirvash is they're tracking Renton and Eureka's life signs as much as they can. They note that Renton is in a state of REM. So, for those of you who don't know, REM, rapid eye movement, is a stage of sleep. It's the stage in which you are meant to have dreams, while the brain is extremely active, even though you're asleep. And they note that Eureka's mental signs are kind of chasing after Renton's. Now, I think there's a very obvious bit of symbolism here, but I'd like to hear what you have to say, G.
I mean, to what end specifically?
I mean, regarding this idea of Eureka trying to sync her mental rhythms with Renton.
I gotta be honest, I don't know if I necessarily had a specific takeaway for that moment. I feel like that very much kind of just gave me the sort of like a very like common trope in a lot of mecha, right? Of like sync rate, right? Like the idea that like, to become a truly like good pilot or whatever, like you need to like have an emotional and mental like understanding and syncing with like your partner. I guess maybe the takeaway I have more is like the fact that it's Eureka chasing after Renton. It's like the thing that you kind of take away from this is, okay, it is not that each character is like going through their own mental prison. This mental whatever is created by Renton, right?
I think that's what I was chasing.
Renton is the catalyst of this entire situation, and somehow Renton has pulled Eureka and Anemone into his dream, I guess, and I guess that likely has something to do with like his connection with the Amita drive, right?
I mean, also the thing is, do you remember in the previous episode as well, Eureka points out that she doesn't dream. She doesn't have dreams. And so the only way she is able to experience the thing that is happening is to be a part of Renton's dream. He is leading her into a place that she cannot go on her own. That was always the symbolism that I took away from that, is that because she has no choice but to sort of synchronize herself to Renton, because dreaming is just not something she does. And we know that Anemone is in some ways a copy of Eureka, or Eureka is a copy of her. So I don't think it's too wild to assume the same thing, right? That they are in Renton's dreams because they are not capable of dreaming themselves.
I mean, it also it is that figuratively, but also almost literally, because it is supposed to reflect how Renton humanizes Eureka and teaches her about what it means to be human. Like, she is quite, not just in this scene specifically, but she is overall. You could see that as her syncing her mental patterns with him, right? Her following him into the world. And that's the nice parallel that they set up with these two characters, right? You think that, like, normally Eureka is the one introducing him to the wider world in a physical, literal sense, but he is also the one introducing her to the wider world in a emotional sense.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a very on-the-nose bit of visual storytelling, but she literally is following in his footsteps in this. We see her show up to the same scenes a little bit after Renton has been there. So she's in the classroom after he has been there, and she follows him until ultimately they are reunited at the end of the dream. There. Speaking of following him, the next scene is yet another in what I warned you would be a recurring theme, which is an important scene set in a toilet.
I do love the bit where he knocks on all the doors and it's always like Eureka answering, but in a slightly different tone of voice.
I was going to say, he's very clearly in a male toilet, but all of the occupied messages are from women. And also a really nice bit of storytelling, I think, is when we switch back to the Renton outside the box perspective, you can see all those cubicles are empty. Like, it's very clear to see. So I don't really know what this is meant to represent, but I'm happy to hear if you have theories about it, because I honestly have no idea.
I think this just represents his, like, embarrassment and weirdness around women, right? Like, the toilet is a place where you are, you know, quite literally exposing yourself. You are vulnerable there.
I was going to say, it's also worth pointing out that the implication is that he's not there to go to the toilet, he's there to throw up, because, like, he covers his mouth, which, you know, it doesn't take a genius to link that to his repeated issue with altitude travel sickness, whatever it
he's
is.
A pukey boy who doesn't study.
It's true, yes.
But that's the thing, right?
Indeed, yes.
Vomiting is also something it is deeply embarrassing to vomit in public, right? So it is an intimate thing, and I think the idea that he knocks on the door and all of the cubicles are occupied by women is not just oh no, I need to go to the toilet, but I can't because all the cubicles are occupied. It also sort of reflects that, you know, what is the most embarrassing possible thing that could happen? Oh, there are women in this place, in my safe place, right? Where I can grow.
You can almost boil this down to, like, the most primordial teenage boy fear can be summarized as girls might be watching. Right.
Yeah.
This is why I joked that this whole nightmare sequence is like a shitty boyhood, like, trauma version of, like, Evangelion, right? Because it's like, it is getting, okay, what is, like, Renton's greatest fear? Like, embarrassing himself in front of hot girls, right?
I mean, this is even more obvious in the next scene with Anemone in the fridge, right?
I mean, that one. Just, I mean, I will say that this scene in the toilet is the most obvious paging Dr. Freud scene in history. It's very, you know, I picked up my big first book of psychological analysis.
I don't know, man. Have you seen an anime called Fooly Cooly?
Oof. But yes,
I know psychologists who use subtext, and they're all
I mean, speaking of a complete lack of subtext, naked Anemone in the fridge is just just an obvious one. I think it's interesting that clearly, like, this is an expression of Renton's sexual angst and fear, you know, but this is clearly an invasion by Anemone into his dreams, because he doesn't know Anemone. He doesn't even know what she looks like. So he has no reason to imagine her here. So clearly she has crowbarred her way into this dream, which sort of reinforces the idea that it's this kind of, like, this shared, intermingled dream state, right? She's almost an invader from another place completely,
and they're vying for dominance over the dream, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There,
I do find it interesting that how in Western culture the idea of a woman in the fridge has completely different implications.
I mean, look, comic books have a lot to answer for. Okay, but
so
indeed,
and for those listeners who may not be aware, but, like, in Western pop culture, woman in fridge is like a shorthand for disposable love interest who gets killed off to make the man feel sad. referring to a scene in Green Lantern, I think, where this happens to Green Lantern's girlfriend. Yeah, but here it's
Kyle Rayner.
Yeah, but here I think it's more of a even a reference to like, what does the fridge mean? It can mean like, it can be like, oh, just another, casual thing that you do. You walk up to the fridge, you go get a drink or something to eat, and boom, oh no, what is it? It's puberty. But it can also refer
What is it? It's puberty is the title of this podcast, I think. No, I mean, I think there's a fairly clear, obvious implication, which is Indiana Jones was here. No, please carry on.
No, I think the idea is also like, it sort of implies that in a way, Anemone is like a product. Like, it has a bit of a like girl in test tube vibes.
I guess I think the thing I mostly took away from it was more the kind of like everyday activity idea, which is like, oh no, you're just going about your business, and then oh no, sexual embarrassment is lurking when you least expect it. Right?
I mean, look, we could say all this, but at the end of the day, Renton did open the fridge a second time.
To be fair,
he did go.
The first time, it's just a giant.
Go for a second.
It's just a giant eye the first time, so you can't blame him for wanting to go back and see perhaps a bit more of who the giant eye.
No, it was the naked. Naked Anemone and then the giant eye.
You're right. I'm getting them mixed up there. Yes,
that's what I mean. That's why I say Renton went in for a second look.
Yes.
He's like, wow, that was awfully embarrassing. However,
it's also very funny because, like, I don't know, but Anemone is like scrawny and weird. Like, this dude is so down bad. He'll have anything.
Look, he's 14 years old.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
Also, like, you say that, but like, I feel like, not that I'm going to like make assumptions or guess, but like, I imagine if we're going with the Anemone is a clone of Eureka thing, or not a clone. Sorry, a like whatever is going on.
They have a shared genetical ancestor.
Yeah, like Renton sees a girl that looks like Eureka.
Yeah,
like, I mean, of course he's going to like be like excited and interested, right?
I think it's not that complicated. I just think that there's a naked girl in the fridge and he's embarrassed, but also maybe he would like to see a naked girl again.
Yeah,
yes.
Like it's very basic, just kind of like crazy psychosexual stuff,
I mean, maybe he hoped that it would be Tallow in there the second time. Just maybe. All the women in his life can humiliate him.
Also, it's a dream. You don't always do logical things in a dream.
True.
Anyway, we move on from there to straight talking Skyfish, who is giving us the lowdown on cruelty and hatred.
There is so much hatred in the world. Yeah.
Yes.
This reminded me of that scene in Digimon Tamers where the like hand puppet is like, life is meaningless.
It's a little bit like a PSA, honestly. Like just this.
But that
this
might be the
flappy,
vibe, Yeah.
I guess. I think they are playing it for surreal comedy a little bit there, but it is a little bit completely out of left field, honestly.
It's like that one weirdly intense friend who, after like downing his third beer, all of a sudden starts talking about metaphysics and ethics. Like,
yes,
this sudden dramatic shift of this weird, cute-ish Skyfish making these like weird general messages that have little to do. I mean, kind of, but also kind of nothing to do with what is happening.
Yes, and then we get Anemone back again, and clearly, like, whether she is conscious of what she's doing or not, she is trying to neg Renton, right? Like, because she's like, I came because you were calling me. And to Renton's credit, he's like, no, it wasn't you I was calling. I don't know who you are. And then Anemone is like, okay, die. Which we do get a series of extremely quick flashes of stuff on screen here in the classic Evangelion fashion. Did anybody check out what they are?
Sorry, I was slightly distracted because that just reminds me of the "Hello, Mr. Obama" meme.
Oh God. Oh man!
Save me,
Well,
Anemone!
I don't
Save
remember
me!
all of-
Hello, Anemone! Save me! Then perish!
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't remember all the images when Renton got hit by the trauma beam, but I think I saw there was the shattered syringe,
Correct,
right?
which
Was
we
that in
also
there?
see in the
That's-
opening.
There's
There
a
are-
guy
there are
flipping
four-
off the camera.
Well, speaking of the opening,
Yeah, there are four
yeah.
images. There's the broken injector. There's a heat map of some sort. There's a picture of Dewey, who, again, it's not the same picture as in the opening,
Right.
but again, he's in the opening. And some sort of lighting rig, which looks strongly like
a surgical table.
it
or
looks
something,
strongly
right?
like somebody is lying on their back looking at a ceiling into like a spotlight or some sort of lighting rig there. An unfamiliar ceiling.
Yeah, like these seem to be Anemone's memories, right? Like,
Right.
I think
that's the
yeah.
implication, right?
And again, there's the implication that like this is kind of a shared dream experience where people are sort of their memories and feelings are commingling and sort of crossing over, and like you're seeing the insides of other people's minds there, sort of like a shared delusion, a shared dream, whatever you call
a
it.
hive mind.
Yes.
I do find it interesting that it's a picture of Dewey instead of just Dewey himself.
It's
Which
not
almost-
I meant by a picture of Dewey, I meant Dewey appears. I didn't mean it's literally a photograph of Dewey. Like, for all intents and purposes, it is Dewey appearing, although it is
an image of Dewey.
Yes, it's an image of Dewey. I should have been clearer there. Then we get Renton falling down the aforementioned time vortex tunnel, and Anemone turning into a giant shark and trying to eat him, which, is... You don't really need us to explain that one, do you?
I love BB.
What if a girl was evil, but also she was a shark?
What if she wanted to gobble you up in every possible metaphorical sense, and maybe also the literal one? I do think it's...
obviously they do the thing right.
I was just going to say, I do think it's very funny that as like... Because Renton is rescued by Eureka and pulled away, but as he's pulled away, you can see like small fish anemone falling back into the tunnel.
That's exactly what I was about to say. It's so goofy looking.
It's pure cartoon, and
especially
it's
because
really
it's
good.
animated very badly. That makes it look like it's like an exit effect in PowerPoint. Like,
remember, fewer frames are funnier.
Yes, it's some strong Inferno Cop energy to the Eureka. I mean, the Anemone sprite getting smaller and.
Yeah,
I am also impervious to your bullets.
We sort of end this out of body experience with sort of a moment of balance, of clarity. Renton and Eureka have been transported into the opening cutscene of Dark Souls, and
the Deus Ex piss filter.
I wanted to say they've been teleported into the kiss scene from Final Fantasy X.
All of these are perfectly valid, but yes,
what we're saying is a very yellow tinted scene.
A scene which, let's be honest, is not like anything we've seen before, aside, of course, from the opening where it appears. But they appear to be in some sort of gigantic forest. There's like huge structures that are maybe trees in the background, although it's very hard to tell. And for a moment,
and it's also flooded. Like,
there's a lake. There's a pool of
water.
water. And someone else is here as well as Renton and Eureka.
Yeah, I mean, we see a glimpse of Renton thinks he may have seen his sister.
Yes, and this is the first time that Diane or an image of Diane has shown up in the present timeline.
Yeah, like in physical present.
Right. Not as a picture.
Yeah. I mean not
there was
physical
a flashback. Yeah.
Right. I mean, she has appeared in flashbacks and photographs and stuff like that. But this is the first time that she has appeared in the timeline of the show as it is happening, And, it's not clear whether she is actually there because, again, this is a dream. They're not hiding that, but she is there for a moment. but what's more important is also that Eureka is here, and there's kind of a I think it's very funny that they draw Renton with like exaggeratedly comic ugu kawaii eyes at the end here.
His eyes are so wet and shiny in this scene.
Yes. But there's a nice moment between them. They escape the dream together, and it feels like a moment of harmony, a moment of balance, a moment of sort of spiritual centeredness, and that lets them escape the Corallian, the dream state they're in, whatever. It's also very notably the thing that we see in the opening, and obviously, trying to prognosticate shows from their openings is kind of a losing battle, but it's an important image, is the point there. And the Corallian collapses in front of Holland and Dominic and all the onlookers' eyes, and we're left with the two LFOs at the very bottom of where the Corallian had been. Inside of
another like coral
inside another weird like
effect.
Yes, the seven swell effect again there, and we see that they have all been. They're all asleep. They're knocked out, whatever, including Anemone, who we have not seen. We're not even sure if she does sleep, quite frankly. But
right,
yes,
I mean, whom we've also not seen ever since she got fish voided.
Yes. But I mean, like, again, it was fairly clear that all that stuff was in a mental state, metaphorical, So, yeah, we leave off at an interesting place here. So, overall thoughts on this pair of episodes, I think, how do we feel about this step for the show? Because clearly it's a very big step in changing its style to a certain extent. It doesn't really answer any of the mysteries that have been built up around any of this stuff. If anything, it's one of those episodes where we actually end up with more questions than we started with, at least in my eyes. But how do you guys feel about it?
Yeah. I think that's important because this is an episode that this is like the first episode that leaves you almost with a reason to keep paying attention to the plot, as in, up until now, we've mostly had character-focused episodes, and over the course of these episodes, we've learned some things about the world where now that can come to a natural narrative climax. This is like your season finale, right? And now they have actually introduced stakes. They have introduced mysteries, and it sort of changes the show from. Well, not entirely, but it's like the first time I get the feeling of like, oh, I want to watch the next episode to see what happens next, and not necessarily to see these characters do fun things again. I think that's like an interesting shift.
Yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from there. It definitely does feel like the first episode where the plot of the show, the overarching plot, is more important. And has been put in the forefront there. G, would you agree with that broadly?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, well, yeah, yes, right. Like the previous two episodes are kind of like laying the foundation for this, right? That like, what this story is going to be about. But I would definitely say 11 and 12 really. I think I said this near the start, right? That 11 and 12 really feel like they are throwing down the gauntlet for, this is what Eureka 7 is going to be about.
Yeah, I think that they expand the scope of the story considerably because they introduce a new style of storytelling and they open up, many, many new questions about the state of the world, the state of what's going on. We have the introduction of the entire Anemone wing of the story almost. And again, I think these episodes are much more about provoking questions than providing answers. For the first time, we see that this conflict, adventure, whatever you want to call it, might be bigger than just the physical realm. That there's a metaphysical aspect, a a sort of spiritual and moral aspect to this adventure as well. There, it definitely feels like the horizons of the show have opened up a great deal.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I find very interesting that the more we get to know the characters, the more more familiar they become to us, the more alien the world becomes. Right? We learn, like at the very start of the show, it was almost as if, oh, this is like the real world, except there are robots and surfing in space. And every episode, new things get introduced that make the world weirder and more arcane and more distinct from our world, while at the same time we learn more about the characters and are able to relate to them more. I think that's a very interesting way in which the show uses its format and its long runtime to keep you on edge all the time, because initially you want to learn more about the characters, but now once you're familiar with the characters, now you become interested in seeing how they interact with the world. So they very gradually open that up, while also at the same time, raising more questions.
Yes, and I think, I'm going to refer back to something you said a few episodes ago, which is you said you were a little disappointed by how mundane the world seemed compared to some of the premise, obviously. And I said at the time that I suspected that might have been a deliberate creative choice, and you can see now why I said that, right? Is that they're trying to establish a baseline of ordinariness so that these more outrageous elements feel the way they are clearly intended to, which is as these freakish things that could not and should not happen there. So I don't think that completely removes your criticism, but I think it sort of buttresses it in terms of some of that slower paced early stuff. G, you had something to say a little bit ago.
I had a couple last minute notes here that are not necessarily super
Go for
important.
Chuck it all in.
That I was just reminded of. I really like Kengo, I guess the weapons master or whatever, however you would describe him. Right, he misses the first shot in the battleship fight, and gunnery officer, yes, and he's very much like, I'm not washed up, all right. Like, I just the gravity is weird on the Corallian. Like, I would have nailed it, and he does the second time. Yeah, so obviously he proves that he's got a knack for it. I just do like that we're finally starting to get little bits and pieces more of the rest of the Gecko state, because obviously a lot of them kind of are just faces in the background.
On that level, I want to shout out Waz's insane headgear, where it looks...
I don't even know what that thing
like
is.
He's like cut up a Dreamcast and he's wearing it on his head or something.
Or he's like wearing like speakers of an old PC, like, those old white PCs that came with with like separate speakers. Yes. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting.
Whatever it is, it's incomprehensible, and I'm into that. But does anybody have anything else they want to touch on before we wrap up here?
I'm interested to see, because the episode ends with, Eureka, Renton, and Anemone. How many times am I going to have to say Anemone in this podcast?
I used to saying that name so many times.
All unconscious. So my idea is like, what I'm interested to see is like, are they gonna pick up Anemone? Is our Gecko State gonna pick her up, or is Dominic going to get there first and retrieve her? Because I'm fairly sure Anemone will end up joining Gecko State at some point, but now is probably not the time for that yet, even though there is an opportunity for it.
I think that's an interesting idea.
Are you a watching episodes preview kind of guy, Aqua?
I did not watch this particular episode preview, no, because I was going to.
Okay.
there's nothing shocking.
There is
No. But yeah, I think that's interesting.
It is an episode examining the consequences of them crashing together.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't think it's much of a spoiler to say that after these sort of like big feature episodes, we're going to spend a few episodes sort of coming back down to earth, metaphorically and literally as well. But, there's a lot of fresh new material to unpick here. And I think, I'm very excited to see what comes next, because we're entering a period of the show that I don't remember so keenly here. So I'm interested to see how it plays out. Also, I think we're coming up on one of my favourite episodes. I can't remember exactly, but we'll have to see. But yes, lots and lots of good stuff to come still. So on that note, I will say thank you to my lovely co-hosts here. Thank you, G. Thank you, Aqua.
Yep.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about evil women some more.
It's an opportunity that we will give you again and again, I'm sure, there. And yeah, just to do a little bit of housekeeping there, next episode, or next installment, we will be covering episode 13, The Beginning, and episode 14, Memory Band. And in the meantime, as always, you can subscribe to the podcast. We're on Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon Music, Podbean, Stitcher, on YouTube, of course. Leave us a comment. Leave us a like, subscribe, all the YouTuber stuff, you know. But let us know what you think. And as always, we'll see you next time.
Bye.